For most people in work organizations, the organization as a whole is a relatively abstract entity. Their day-to-day work experience is shaped far more by the work group, team, department, or work unit than by the organization as a whole. The work group is their direct social environment at work and the most important social influence on how they experience their work. Moreover, organizations are increasingly structuring work to be group or team-based, where groups and teams rather than individuals are responsible for production and performance. This requires people to work in close cooperation with their fellow group members, and it makes coordination, cooperation, and communication between group members critical elements of task performance. The causes and consequences of group processes are typically understood within an input process outcome (IPO) framework, in which group processes, what happens in the group during task performance, are seen as the mechanism through which group inputs, resources internal and external to the group, and the organizational context, are translated into group outcomes, productivity, performance, or some other indicator of group effectiveness. In recent years, research has highlighted group processes as critical in this respect, including group information processing, group conflict, group members' shared understanding of, and shared feelings about, the task situation, and group efficacy. Conflict at work, conflict management, diversity in the workplace, group cohesiveness, group decision-making quality, group decision-making techniques, group development. Groupthink, input process output model, intergroup relations, interpersonal communication styles, just as in teams meetings at work. Negotiation, mediation, and arbitration, networking, social exchange theory, social loafing, social norms and conformity, social support. The literature on conflict at work is an extensive body that can be divided into two research streams. Some studies focus on the effective management of conflict, whereas others emphasize the emergence of conflict at work. The latter group of studies is pertinent to our understanding of the concept of conflict at work, its antecedents, and its consequences. Overall, studies demonstrate that some personality traits may be important antecedents of conflict. Although conflict can be measured across organizational levels, much of the research has focused on the interpersonal and intergroup levels and suggests that its outcomes affect both organizational effectiveness and personal well-being. Furthermore, conflict is a key construct in the recent work of occupational stress researchers, in which it is regarded as a leading social stressor. Conflict has been defined in many ways across many studies, making it difficult to agree on one clear conceptualization of the construct. Nevertheless, researchers agree on certain definitional properties. For example, that at least two parties must be involved in order for conflict to arise. Recent work has advanced our understanding of the definitional components of conflict. Specifically, Henri Barkey and John Hartwick tested a framework for conflict that consists of behavioral, cognitive, and affective components. In this framework, the behavioral component of conflict is reflected in the interference of one party with the objectives of another. The cognitive component refers to disagreement between the parties and reflects a discrepancy between the parties' interests, needs, or objectives. Finally, the affective component refers to the negative emotional states associated with the experience of conflict at work. This conceptualization of conflict supports a multiple theme perspective in which all three components must be present in order for the situation to constitute a conflict. According to two widely accepted sources, task and relationship conflict. Task conflict refers to conflict over policies, distribution of resources, or ways of completing a task. Relationship conflict refers to conflict emerging from personality clashes or emotionally charged interactions with others. Researchers such as Karen A. Jen, Robin L. Pinkley, and hence, conflict can be conceptualized as comprising three definitional components: interference, disagreement, and negative emotion, and as being one of two types, task or relationship. Because of discrepancies in construct definition, measures of conflict are often created for the purpose of a specific study. Often, these measures lack sound psychometric properties. In fact, even widely used conflict measures that have reliability and validity support suffer from an incomplete conceptualization of the construct. For example, Jen's intergroup conflict measure differentiates between task and relationship conflict but measures mostly the disagreement component of conflict. M. Afzal-Rahim's measure, ROSI, though it assesses the amount of intergroup, interpersonal, or intergroup conflict, does not differentiate between sources of conflict. To advance our understanding of the impact of conflict on organizational functioning, a comprehensive measure of conflict is needed. There is some evidence that individuals who are high in specific dispositional traits are likely to experience, or at least perceive, more conflict at work. For example, individuals who are high in trait anger, which is a tendency to perceive situations as inciting feelings of anger, report experiencing more conflict at work. Similarly, longitudinal research shows that high type A individuals report more conflict. Trait anxiety and negative affectivity have also received some attention in relation to the experience of conflict. Again, results indicate that individuals high in these two traits report experiencing more conflict. Locus of control, or the general belief that one's actions or external forces control outcomes, is also associated with the experience of conflict. These studies, however, are less conclusive. There is some support for the notion that externals report more conflict, but findings also suggest that internals are more reactive to conflict. Studies that do not differentiate between the two sources of conflict, task and relationship, consistently report negative outcomes associated with the experience of interpersonal conflict in the workplace. The same is not true of studies that distinguish between sources of conflict. The latter research supports the notion that positive outcomes are associated with moderate amounts of task conflict. For the purpose of organization, the negative personal and organizational outcomes of conflict at work will be presented first, followed by the positive consequences of conflict. Exists between the frequency of conflicts experienced at work and depressive symptoms. Negative affective reactions, including anger, annoyance, and frustration, have also been repeatedly associated with conflict. These findings may have serious implications given the role that negative emotions play in human immune function and the production of cortisol. Somatic complaints, or self-reported physical symptoms, have also been associated with interpersonal conflict at work. In these studies, employees who reported more conflict also reported experiencing more somatic symptoms. Furthermore, burnout and life dissatisfaction have been shown to positively correlate with the experience of organizational conflict. The literature on conflict emergence suggests that conflict can have detrimental consequences on organizational effectiveness. For example, it has been shown that employees who perceive more conflict are less satisfied with their jobs. These findings were consistent for both relationship and task conflict when satisfaction with the group was the criterion of interest. Conflict can also affect organizational functioning through turnover and counterproductivity. In fact, turnover intentions are reported to be higher for employees who experience more conflict. Given that turnover intentions are a good indicator of actual turnover, conflict can be said to have bottom-line cost implications for organizations. Counterproductive behaviors or behaviors aimed at hurting the organization or the individuals who are part of it, are the focus of much research in the occupational stress literature. Interestingly, self-report and cross-source data support a positive correlation between the frequency of conflict at work and counterproductive work behaviors. It is estimated that the cost of counterproductive behaviors, including theft, lost productivity, and aggression, may be as much as $200 million per year. Performance can also suffer because of conflict in organizations. These findings are particularly true for the occurrence of relationship conflict, and they are more complex when the conflict is task-related. As a result, recent literature has classified relationship conflict as detrimental to group performance, whereas task conflict is considered beneficial to organizational functioning. Although recent meta-analytic work has questioned whether task conflict results in positive outcomes, several studies suggest that it does. This is particularly true for groups with non-routine tasks in which a moderate amount of task conflict has been shown to improve performance. Decision quality has also received attention in the conflict literature and may be treated as an indicator of group performance. Task conflict relates to better decisions and decision quality. Furthermore, task conflict is associated with the conception of ideas, effective use of resources, and task completion. Nevertheless, Maximizing the positive outcomes of conflict is not as simple as increasing task conflict while eliminating relationship conflict because the two are positively correlated. Instead, organizations must develop effective conflict management systems to benefit from task conflict. They are more complex when the conflict is task-related. As a result, recent literature has classified relationship conflict as detrimental to group performance, whereas task conflict is considered beneficial to organizational functioning. In recent years, occupational stress researchers have turned their attention to less widely studied stressors, such as interpersonal conflict at work. From this body of research, it is possible to conclude that interpersonal conflicts are a leading source of stress for employees across age groups, cultures, and industries. Furthermore, studies have shown that employees perceive conflict at work to be more vexing than traditionally studied stressors, such as role conflict and ambiguity. Consequently, Paul E. Spector and his colleagues proposed a model of interpersonal conflict, based on an occupational stress perspective, in which conflict is treated as a stressor that may result in a variety of behavioral, physiological, and psychological strains. Given the impact that conflict at work can have on organizational effectiveness and personal well-being, it is not surprising that it remains an important construct in organizational research. Recent work has proposed a comprehensive framework for understanding the definitional components of conflict. This model reinforces the traditionally accepted differentiation between task and relationship conflict while also proposing effective, behavioral, and cognitive elements. Although this construct has been the center of empirical attention for decades, there are still many promising directions for future research. Conflict in organizations has received considerable attention in the business, psychology, and communication literatures. Nevertheless, a concise definition of conflict is lacking across studies and disciplines. In fact, researchers often provide definitions that differ from one study to another or fail to define conflict as it is measured in their studies. There is some agreement, however, that conflict takes place between two or more parties and constitutes a disagreement, an interference, and a negative emotional reaction. Two widely accepted sources of conflict are task conflict and relationship conflict. Furthermore, conflict can occur at the interpersonal, intergroup, and intergroup levels. Research on interpersonal conflict, also known as dyadic conflict, can be classified into one of two streams focusing on the occurrence of the conflict or its management. Conflict emergence studies explore the frequency or amount of conflict that respondents experience and its associated consequences. The second stream concentrates on the styles that employees use to manage interpersonal conflict at work, and this conflict management differs from conflict resolution in that the latter is primarily focused on the termination or reduction of conflict. Resolution strategies such as mediation and arbitration often do not require interventions that result in changes to organizational processes or structures. Conflict management, on the other hand, emphasizes organizational learning to maximize the constructive aspects of conflict while minimizing its detrimental consequences. In fact, recent research in the business field suggests that a moderate amount of task conflict is functional and desirable. These studies also posit that relationship conflict is deleterious to the work environment. For example, task conflict is associated with enhanced decision quality among top management, whereas relationship conflict is detrimental to decision quality. Therefore, an effective conflict management system is one in which employees adopt a conflict style that is appropriate for the situation while balancing the amount and type of conflict encountered. Conflict management may be depicted as a process of conflict measurement and intervention development. In other words, a critical first step in conflict management is to assess the amount, source, level, and style of handling conflict. Limited psychometrically sound measures exist to measure the amount of conflict perceived by employees. More options are available to measure styles of handling conflict situations. A comprehensive diagnosis is needed to formulate an organizational intervention. Such an intervention may require that employees be trained on when and how to use different styles of handling interpersonal conflict. Like any other training program, however, this type of process intervention is dependent on organizational support so that employees are able to apply newly learned skills when managing conflict on the job. A second type of intervention emphasizes changing characteristics of the organization to help manage conflict. For example, the cause of conflict may be a poorly designed reward system, which results in personal rivalries among colleagues and a high number of relationship conflicts. In this case, a structural intervention would focus on designing a reward system that is perceived to be fair. Other structural interventions may focus on changing organizational procedures that cause conflict or structuring the organizational hierarchy in such a way that parties can appeal to a higher authority when they are unable to reach a decision. Individuals differ in their styles of handling conflicts. In fact, employees may resort to different styles of conflict management depending on the situation. The choice of style is influenced by a variety of factors, such as what has worked for the individual in the past, the style of their adversary, and norms surrounding the conflict situation. Several models of conflict styles have been proposed over time. For example, Morton Deutsch proposed a two-style model in which individuals engage in a competitive or cooperative style. Others have posited a three-style model of conflict management that includes non-confrontation, solution orientation, and control. Four-style models have also received attention. For example, the model of Dean G. Pruitt proposes four styles of conflict management: yielding, problem-solving, inaction, and contending. However, a five-style model has received the most attention and empirical support. Therefore, emphasis will be placed on M. Afzalur Rahim's 5 styles of conflict management.